Hi, this is Phil Hinton for avforums.tv and welcome back to our videos covering room acoustics. I continued my chat with Gecko director Rob Sinden about the most common issues to affect audio systems in a room, most notably wavelengths and room modes.
Different frequencies have different wavelengths. So a baby crying is a high-pitched sound and it has a very short wavelength. Because the wavelength of that sound might be very short, 1 millimetre or 2 metres long, if it hits something that's half that depth, say a 1 millimetre piece of curtain for instance, that sound will be absorbed almost perfectly. Bass waves are much longer. A bass wave might be 10 foot, 20 foot, 30 foot long. The problem with that is obviously you can't put 10 foot of fabric in your room to absorb the sound. So wherever you have two parallel walls facing each other, you'll have the bass wave hit the wall opposite and bounce backwards and forwards in the room. And when the length of the wave that is bouncing backwards and forwards is the same as the distance between your two walls, it just keeps bouncing backwards and forwards until gradually it decays. So it's a little bit like dropping a stone in a pond and watching the ripples fan out and then bounce back when they hit the sides. It's a similar analogy to that. And if you want to improve your audio system, you do have to understand a little bit of the physics of sound. The fundamentals are really quite straightforward, and understanding of them, I think people investing more time in understanding about acoustics and how sound works, which personally I find interesting. I'm probably a bit of a geek, but it's schoolboy science, and once you understand those problems, you can then start looking at scientific ways of addressing them. And the good news is it doesn't need to cost anything. It's not going out and buying an expensive cable or a fancy D2A converter or a power supply. It's physical changes you can make within your room. These are changes you can make by moving the listening position, moving your speaker position, redirecting the bass to a subwoofer, putting a plant in the room, drawing your curtains, putting a rug on the floor. These are things you can decide to do on a Saturday, spend a couple of hours experimenting and make some real improvements that you won't achieve through upgrading equipment. Because if you put a better CD player in or a better Blu-ray player, you will get improvements there, but if there's errors created by the room, the better product won't shift those problems. They're fundamental to the room and you have to address those problems within the room.
But Rob, I've got the perfect room. My room doesn't impact on my sound. Am I talking the truth, or am I just unaware of the issues?
The perfect room doesn't exist. There's no such thing as a perfect room. Any room will affect the sound of a sound being reproduced in it, whether it's my voice or the sound of a hi-fi system. Even on as we're making this video, you can probably make a few assumptions about the room that we're in here. If we're in my kitchen, for example, it's a much smaller room, hard surfaces. You'd hear that from over the microphone on your computer, on the speakers on your computer. You would hear how much the room is affecting the sound. We have recently built what we believe is one of the best acoustic environments to reproduce movie systems in. And we've spent about £25,000 on the design and fit out of the space in addition to the standard build cost. So we really, it's almost a money no object exercise. And the sound system in there sounds much more consistent than it would otherwise. But even so, you can still hear there's errors created by the room, which electronic correction helps fix. So if you believe you've got the perfect room, you haven't really understood the problem. You've got 20,000 different lengths of wavelength bouncing around the room from 5 or 7 speakers, hitting all sorts of different surfaces, being reflected, working in 3 dimensions in time. It's actually an incredibly complex problem. Understanding it means you can start addressing it, but to say you've got a perfect room and you don't need to look at that, if you're serious about sound, that's not a serious response, I'm afraid.
So when people look to spec their own home theatres or are going to a dealer to to get them to install a system. What's the first thing that dealer should be speccing for the room? Is it the equipment or is it something else?
You shouldn't be speccing anything for the system. The first thing that a competent dealer should say is, what's your room like? Most of the time it's a case of people have a particular brand or product they like and they'll recommend that you have that. And it's completely the wrong way about it. I'd turn the question around and say, if you're asking me how you should design what system you should have, I'd be saying, well, how big is your room? How far down the room are you sitting? How many seats are you going to put in there? And from that, you can start to assess what are the right type of products to fit into that space, what the requirement of the particular product is to fulfill that application. You do it without thinking on the video side. If you had a light, airy room, you would say use a plasma rather than a projector. So that's a very obvious analogy. If you've got a dark room and a dedicated theatre, you'd err towards the side of a projector. Exactly the same thing is true with an audio system. Depending on the acoustics of the space, where you're going to sit, what your priorities are, then you need to start looking at choosing equipment based on those facts.
So Rob, it's a fascinating demonstration room that you have here. Forum members are more than welcome to speak to you and maybe come along and have a listen for themselves if they like. But if they can't do that and they can't get down to where you are in the country, but they are looking to improve their home theatre sound and vision, what recommendations would you give them?
Well, find a good dealer you can work with, and find a dealer that really adds something to the mix that you're putting together. And for me, acoustics are a huge part of any audio system. I'd say they're over half of what you hear. And you need someone that has a knowledge of acoustics and can suggest some practical ways of reducing the effect that that's having on your audio system. And there are a number of organisations that train in that, independent organisations that aren't trying to sell anything. HAA and THX are the two most obvious ones. And someone that's done that training should be able to give some practical advice on the space that you have, the problems that you will have with the acoustics in that room, and be able to come up with some suggestions as to how to correct it. So the first thing is assessing how good the dealer is. And then if you find someone that can show you some rooms that they've done before, can talk you through the process they've used, can demonstrate a system to you, then take their advice and run with it. We're more than happy to see forum members here. My business is selling hi-fi and home cinema, but I've been a geek with this for 25 years. I've travelled all around the world listening to hi-fi and home cinema systems. And I love showing it off to people. I love showing my toys off. So if anyone wants to come for a listen, I'm more than happy for them to put a few CDs in the car and come on over. And I think they'll find the approach interesting. We're not just trying to sell people product, we're trying to get them to understand a little bit more about the problem and then demonstrate solutions and hopefully show them better audio than they've heard before. I hope we've been able to do that with you today.